It is my true honor to introduce our speaker today. We've been trying to get this veteran to speak at this program for several years. We just haven't been able to work out the details so that it would be possible. This year it is. If I mess up his name, we had a conversation about this, and he understands that if a sergeant major calls you whatever, you come running. So, he gets it. Specialist Gage received his draft notice in the fall of 1965. He attended boot camp and AIT at Fort Leonardwood, sorry about that, and became a 12 Bravo 20. Specialist Gage is a combat engineer who also took jungle training at Fort Campbell. He is a Vietnam veteran who achieved the rank of Specialist E4 in the United States Army. Much of his training was very physically demanding. He had to complete a 50-mile road march that took 17 hours. That alone is amazing. He deployed to Vietnam. He served from September of 1966 to October of 1967. Some of his main duties were to destroy personnel mines and build base camps or airfields. He spent a great deal of time driving a bulldozer and clearing the jungles of Vietnam. His awards include the National Defense Service Ribbon, Vietnam Service Medal, Vietnam Campaign Medal, and 2 overseas service bars, and was a sharpshooter with an M14 rifle. Before he speaks, we're going to show a few clips of a PBS documentary about Vietnam. Specialist Gage helped with this PBS documentary. It was nominated for an Emmy Award. And it is well worth your time to view the entire video at www.pioneer.org/Vietnam.
I was drafted January 2nd, 1966 in Lackawanna County. In September of 1966, we left for Vietnam. I spent 13 months there. When I got drafted, I was actually working for Eastman Kodak Company, and I'd been there long enough so that each month they would give me 4 rolls of movie film or slides if I wanted it. So I wound up with about 20 rolls of movie film and 20 sets of slides. The fact that I had a Super 8 camera there, very few of the guys had a camera. I wasn't that great a photographer, but I enjoyed taking the movies. It was hot and muddy and dirty, or it was hot and dusty and muddy and dirty. Every day you just had to, you were covered with sweat and dust and mud, and it was pretty intense. Yeah, the heat and humidity was very intense. When I got there, I weighed 175 pounds, and when I left, I weighed 145. I lost 30 pounds over there, just from sweating it off, so to speak. So yeah, pretty intense. Yeah, you took a pair of fatigues, and Of course, I pushed the jungle, I'm sure that I was underneath that stuff. And luckily, I haven't had cancer or anything, and I've actually led a pretty healthy life. Just my regrets that so many young men didn't get to come home. That's the worst of it. I don't think that they died in vain. I really don't, because of the way the South Vietnamese people have turned out now. We've had a lot of wars where things haven't turned out quite so well.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Nye, and Mr. Eustace did the formal introduction, and now I get to do the personal introduction. Thank you again to Public Pioneer for giving us permission, and Julie Cooney for editing the parts that Jerry was in. The clips that you saw will be talked about later. On a personal note, the man sitting behind me is an extremely hard worker. He spent his younger years farming and some truck driving and some odds and ends in there. And then he's worked hard all of his life, and he does recycling, and he loves junk. He loves it. And he always has a smile on his face. If you know him personally, you'll know that even in the worst of circumstances, he can find something positive about it. And if you know him, you know I am true. And he will greet you as if he's known you his entire life. He loves to garden. He loves good food and lots of it, and he loves crispy cookies. So, here you go. He also loves his family, and he loves his country. And I have been able to see more of that in the last year and a half than I did the other 45 years previous. And that has been extremely special to me and to my family. And he really, really loves his grandkids. So I'm a public speaker. I love speaking. This is the most important introduction to me, because the man behind me, you may know as Jerry Gage, but I know him as my dad. So please welcome Jerry. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, everyone. Happy Veterans Day. My name is Gerald Gage, and I'm a Vietnam veteran. It's a privilege and an honor to be here today to tell you about some of the experiences of being in the Army and going to Vietnam. I hope that you enjoyed the film clip from Vietnam. I guess our major gave you the information you need to look at the whole interview. I'd like to give you a very special thanks to my daughter, Mrs. Nye, and retired Sergeant Major Joe Eustace for putting the Veterans Day program together. Also, thanks to all the students for making this a great Veterans Day celebration. It's very important to all of us. Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for coming to celebrate Veterans Day. We are here today to honor all of our veterans and thank them for their service. To our World War II veterans and Korean War veterans, thank you. You are my heroes. As a small boy, I remember you talking about your experiences. I remember when Korean War veterans came home in 1953. My cousin was a Korean War veteran, and I remember how happy our family was when he came home. To our Vietnam veterans, I say welcome home, brothers, and
and thank you for your service. To our Gulf War veterans and veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan and the war on terrorism, thank you. You are truly heroes. To all of our active duty military, you are the ones putting yourselves in harm's way to protect our country. You are the new heroes. A very special thanks to you and your families for your sacrifices. My story starts in Appleton, Minnesota. I was born on May 26, 1946. My parents were Walter and Vivian Gage. I attended country school near Nassau, Minnesota, and I went to Marietta, Minnesota for junior high and high school. In 1964, I went to California, and I got a job in Palo Alto at the Eastman Kodak Film Processing Lab. The Vietnam War was escalating, and in the fall of 1965, I received my draft notice. I was inducted into the U.S. Army on January 3rd, 1966. I was 19 years old. I was sent to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for basic infantry training, and after basic training, I was trained to be a combat engineer and later assigned to D Company of the 27th Combat Engineer Battalion at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. We were told at that time that we were going to Vietnam to stop communist aggression in South Vietnam. Our job as a combat engineer unit would be clearing landing zones, building base camps, and airfields and runways. We continued our training at Fort Campbell, which included jungle and survival training, and clearing minefields. We also had hands-on experience with C3 and C4 plastic explosives, and deck cord, which we use for our landing zones in the jungle. On about the 7th of September 1966, we deployed as a unit and left from Oakland, California on the USS Simon Buckner troop carrier. The ship held about 5,000 troops. There were 2,500 Army troops and 2,500 Marines. The ship's cruising speed was 20 knots, which equaled about 550 miles a day. So with one stop in Guam and another stop in Da Nang to drop off the Marines, it took about 3 weeks to get to Saigon. It was a long, rough ride, and some of the guys got seasick. Our squad leader, Sergeant Taylor, was one of them. He threw up over the side of the ship and lost his false teeth. So it took about 6 months for him to get new teeth, so he was over there without teeth for a while. I didn't put this in my thing, but we affectionately called him Sergeant Gummer. We arrived off the coast of Saigon on September 29th, 1966, and landing crafts came and out and picked us up, ferried us to shore, just like you'd see in the movies. And we had no idea what was going to happen, but lucky for us, there was no enemy fire when we landed. We were transported by truck to a staging area near Long Binh and stayed there until our equipment arrived. It took about 2 weeks for our company to get all of our equipment and to get our first assignment. We left our staging area at Long Binh and started a convoy to Dao Chiang, located about 80 miles north of the Michelin rubber plantation. And our assignment was to clear a landing zone and build a runway and a base camp. Our convoy included all of D Company of the 27th Combat Engineer Battalion. There were 120 of us. The convoy was led by a Jeep with an M60 machine gun and followed by 2 lowboy semi-trailers loaded with 2 HT-16 Alice Chalmers dozers. And it had also 1 road grader on a flatbed, 4 5-ton dump trucks, and I was driving one of the dump trucks. And behind us were 4 deuce-and-a-half trucks loaded with men and equipment, also several 3/4-ton trucks and Jeeps with the officers and radio equipment. The road to Dao Chiang was narrow, muddy, and slippery, so it was very slow going. And we also encountered many refugees fleeing the countryside to escape the communists. During one of these encounters, the lead lowboy with a dozer on it slid off the narrow road and nearly tipped over. So the convoy was delayed several hours while the dozer and the truck were gotten back on the road. We finally arrived near Daojiang in late afternoon and immediately began to secure a perimeter and establish a small base camp. Our training kicked in. 12-man tents went up quickly. Bunkers were built. Foxholes were dug. Each foxhole on the perimeter had a field of fire established to overlap with the next foxhole. Now there weren't any infantry there yet. It was just us combat engineers, but we were trained to be infantry first and then combat engineers second. So we had practiced all of this at Fort Campbell during our training, so we knew exactly what to do. We got our tents up, we got our holes dug, we got our work done, and we ate sea rations and some of us slept while others pulled guard duty. I slept, and about midnight I woke up to a loud explosion. A mortar round hit less than 20 feet to my left. There were more explosions. Our squad leader, Sergeant Taylor, was yelling orders. Mortars, mortars, get on the ground. Get on your flak jacket, grab your helmet, get your weapons, get to the perimeter. Shrapnel from the mortar round had come through my mosquito net and missed me by inches. I was on the ground getting my pants and my boots on and grabbed my weapons and my gear. It was a calm, damp night, so the smoke from the mortars hung like fog, just about 4 feet above us. Above us were parachute flares, so it was like daylight. Sergeant Taylor was still yelling behind us, stay down, get to the perimeter. The whole thing was like a bad dream, but it was real. My buddy J.D. Wardlow and I crawled under the trucks that were parked in a circle near the perimeter. Mortar round had hit the fuel tanks, but we crawled right through that to get to our foxhole that we had dug earlier. We made it. Now what Wardlow said. We had M14 rifles with 6 20-round clips and 2 hand grenades each. Well, we hadn't fired our weapons since we got to Vietnam, so we each fired a couple rounds. The mortar stopped. It was totally quiet. And we waited. What's next? We said quietly. And we waited some more and nothing happened. And dawn came, about 6 hours. The smoke cleared. We started hearing all clear. We went back to the tent for sea rations, and we started to see the damage. Some of the tents looked like they were hit with shotgun shells. 111 mortar rounds had hit in our little perimeter that night, and we were very lucky, only 2 wounded. My friend Larry Weimer and our motor pool sergeant Nelson. None serious. We had survived what they call the baptism under fire. We didn't know it then, but we were right in the middle of a Viet Cong stronghold. We got mortared every night for the next 30 days. We slept with our boots on next to our foxholes. We took turns sleeping and pulling guard duty. 2 hours on, 2 hours off. 2 hours of sleep, 2 hours of watching. We were there to build a runway, and the Viet Cong were determined to stop us. Finally, artillery and armored cavalry units arrived from the 4th Division, 3rd Brigade, and began pounding the surrounding area with artillery. Armored personnel carriers patrolled the outer perimeters while we were working. Airstrikes were called in. The jets were so low that we could see the pilots in there. It was pretty awesome. We were glad to see them come. We worked for about a week, and then for some reason our 4 dump trucks were sent to get a load of crushed rock each from a place called the Black Virgin Mountain. And I was a dump truck driver at the time, along with J.D. Wardlow, Titherington, and another fellow that I can't remember his name. So a Jeep with the M60 took the lead, and we were on a 30-mile run to the Black Mountain, just 5 vehicles. We made it within about 5 miles of the mountain, and J.D. Wardlow was ahead of me. I'm the last truck in the convoy, and we were on a narrow stretch of road with rice paddies on both sides. And I see a lot of people out there planting rice. Didn't look right. We were moving pretty fast and staying close together. there's an explosion. Wardlow's truck hits a landmine. All 8 of his black tires just disappeared. They were blown to shreds. Shrapnel and gravel hit my windshield. But I'm far enough back so it didn't break. My first thought was, we got to keep moving. If Wardlow stops, I'm going to push him. He kept his truck going. He had front-wheel drive on the truck. The front wheels were spinning. He got to a wide spot in the road, and he bailed out and got in my truck and jumped in with me, and we're out of there. And that's about all I can remember about that episode. The next thing I recall is that we were back in base camp, and we're telling Sergeant Melton, the motor pool sergeant, what happened, and he asked Wardlow if he thought he needed to go change his shorts. We had a good laugh over that, and it was just like a matter of fact, you know, because we had been mortared so many times, and the motor pool sergeant didn't even affect him. He said, well, you're back, everything's okay. So then he said to me, well, Wardlow needs a truck. And so he said, I want you to drive a lowboy, and Wardlow can drive your truck. And so I thought, good for me. Lowboy drivers are an SB5 slot, and I was only an SB4, so I had survived another episode and I was going to get a raise, so I thought that was pretty good. And a few days later, after pushing dirt with the dozer for the runway, Sergeant Melton sent me out to pick up an armored personnel carrier that had hit a landmine. And in the movie clip that you've seen, that was the armored personnel carrier that I was picking up. So it took about 6 weeks to finish the runway at Daotiang. And during that time, we had many mortar attacks. Sergeant Raymond Lopez, Sergeant Littell, and PFC Gerald Stewart from D Company were killed in action. 11 more were wounded. Bob Fermi and Terry Rader received Bronze Stars for their bravery. The artillery and the cavalry units also suffered many casualties during that time. After Daotiang, we went on to a multi-unit search and destroy mission called Operation Junction City. And most of the time during that, I ran the dozer pushing jungle for artillery fire zones and cleared small base camps and cleared roads. And some of our squads had to go out the back of Chinook helicopters on rope ladders to blow landing zones to get the infantry in and get them out of there. I didn't have to do that. I was pretty fortunate. Then we went to Swan Lock and we built the base camp. And I got to kind of hurry through this because Jed said I got about 12, 15 minutes. So anyway, then Operation Port C happened and we were with the Australians there. Great bunch of guys. Then we were down the Mekong River to the Mekong Delta to a town called Ben Long. And we were sent there to build a perforated steel plank runway. When that was built, most of us would get to go home. And after the runway was built, I got to go home. I left on October 7th, arrived in California on October 8th, 1967. I flew from California to Minneapolis, took a cab to downtown Minneapolis and bought a brand new car. I drove it home, surprised my family, mom and dad and family. And a couple days after Christmas in 1967, I was back in California at Eastman Kodak Company, doing the holiday rush at Eastman Kodak Company, just like nothing happened. And that's the end of my story.